When we picture royalty, we think of golden crowns, grand castles, and families born to rule. For centuries, kings and queens worked endlessly to prove they were chosen by God, symbols of power, stability, and perfection. But behind palace walls, history tells another story. A story filled with sorrow, secrets, and children whose births often brought not joy but dread. Because not every royal baby was born healthy. And when a child entered the world with deformities, illness, or hidden conditions, it could shake the very foundation of a dynasty. In societies where bloodlines meant everything, one fragile heir could turn into a national crisis. These weren't just private heartbreaks. They became moments that changed the course of entire kingdoms. The birth of a royal child was never simply a family matter. From the moment a queen went into labor, entire nations held their breath. Her strong, healthy boy meant the line of succession was safe, alliances were secure, and the dynasty would endure. But when a child was born weak, deformed, or unlikely to live long, the consequences spread far beyond the nursery. For royal families, the stakes were enormous. A deformity wasn't just seen as an illness. It was often taken as divine punishment, a curse on the family, or proof that their rule had lost legitimacy. Monarchs reigned not just through politics, but through image. Appearances mattered as much as reality, and nothing damaged that image more than a sickly or imperfect heir. The Habsburgs were once the most powerful dynasty in Europe, ruling lands that stretched from Spain to Austria, from the Netherlands to the Americas. Yet beneath their glittering crowns lay a dark truth. Generations of intermarriage, meant to keep their bloodline pure, slowly weakened them. Nowhere was this tragedy more visible than in the life of King Charles II of Spain. Born in 1661, he was the last heir of the Spanish Habsburgs, the child upon whom an empire's hopes rested. But instead of securing the dynasty's future, his birth marked the beginning of its downfall. Charles inherited the infamous Habsburg jaw, so large and distorted that his lower lip stuck out grotesquely, making it almost impossible for him to chew or speak clearly. His oversized tongue caused him to drool and slur his words. His body was frail and underdeveloped. He didn't walk until the age of 8, and even then his steps were shaky. His mind, too, suffered. Though taught by priests and tutors, Charles struggled to grasp even simple lessons. He spoke poorly, showed little political understanding, and foreign ambassadors often described him as feeble-minded or cursed. Many Spaniards even believed he was bewitched, calling him El Hechizado, the bewitched one. And yet this fragile boy was crowned king. He sat on the throne of one of Europe's mightiest empires, a realm that demanded strength, strategy, and vision. But instead of leading, Charles was used as a pawn, manipulated by courtiers, foreign powers, and even his own relatives. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was his failure to produce an heir. Despite 2 marriages, first to Maria Louisa of Orleans and later to Mariana of Neuburg, Charles remained childless. His weakness extended to infertility, sealing the fate of the Spanish Habsburg line. When Charles died in 1700 at just 38 years old, he left behind no children and no future for his dynasty. His death sparked the War of Spanish Succession, a massive conflict that engulfed Europe and permanently shifted the balance of power. One man's deformities, born of centuries of inbreeding, brought down an empire that had once dominated the world. In England, the Tudor dynasty also carried the burden of fragile heirs. Before Henry VIII became infamous for his 6 wives and ruthless reign, there was his older brother Arthur, Prince of Wales. Arthur was England's great hope, handsome, well-educated, and married to Catherine of Aragon. His union was meant to link England and Spain and lead to a golden age. But Arthur's health was always fragile. Pale, weak, and sickly, he seemed unsuited for the weight of kingship. Just months after his wedding, disaster struck. Arthur fell gravely ill, likely from tuberculosis or the dreaded sweating sickness that swept through Tudor England. At only 15 years old, he died, leaving his young widow Catherine devastated. His death changed everything. Henry, Arthur's younger brother, suddenly became heir. And when Henry later married Catherine, it set off a chain of events that reshaped England forever. His desperate hunt for a male heir led to annulments, executions, and ultimately the break with the Catholic Church. The English Reformation, the rise of Protestantism, and centuries of religious conflict all trace back to Arthur's early death. The frailty of one boy shifted the destiny of an entire nation. France, too, knew this pain. The Bourbon dynasty projected wealth, strength, and divine authority. Louis XIV, the Sun King, embodied this with endless rituals, glittering palaces, and the appearance of perfection. But inside the royal family, things were far more fragile. Sick or deformed children were often hidden away. Some died in infancy, their names quickly forgotten. Others were raised quietly in isolation, never allowed to appear at Versailles. Perfection had to be maintained, even if it meant burying the truth. Perhaps the most tragic story came a century later, under Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Their young son, Louis Charles, the Dauphin of France, was born in 1785, a symbol of hope in troubled times. But fate was cruel. When the French Revolution erupted, his world collapsed. His parents were executed, and the already sickly boy was thrown into a dark prison cell. Neglected, abused, and left to waste away, he died at just 10 years old. His body was broken not only by illness, but by the brutality of revolution. The boy who should have been Louis XVI became instead a haunting symbol of a monarchy falling apart. His death marked the end of innocence for the Bourbons, proof that even children could not escape history's storms. No royal tragedy, though, is more infamous than that of the Romanovs, Russia's last imperial family. For Tsar Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra, the birth of a son in 1904 was supposed to secure their dynasty. After 4 daughters, the long-awaited boy Alexei brought great joy. But joy soon turned to dread. Alexei had hemophilia, a blood disorder that kept his blood from clotting. Even a small injury could be deadly. Passed down from Queen Victoria of Britain, the condition became a curse on many European royal houses. For the Romanovs, it was devastating. Every stumble, every bruise threw the court into panic. In their desperation, the family turned to the mystic healer Grigory Rasputin, who seemed to ease the boy's suffering. His growing influence over the royal family shocked the nation. Many believed Russia was being ruled by a madman. As the empire slid into revolution, Alexei's illness became more than a personal struggle. It was seen as a sign of the monarchy's weakness. When the Romanovs were executed in 1918, Alexei was just 13 years old. His short, painful life, hidden behind secrecy, played a role in bringing down one of the world's most powerful dynasties. For centuries, queens bore a burden few could imagine. Their worth was often measured not by wisdom or leadership, but by their ability to bear strong, healthy heirs. When children were born weak or deformed, the blame almost always fell on the mother. Queen Anne of England is perhaps the most heartbreaking example. Over her lifetime, she endured 17 pregnancies. 17 times she carried the hope of her dynasty inside her. But fate was merciless. Miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant deaths came one after another. Only one child, Prince William, survived infancy. For a while it seemed the Stuart line might continue, but tragedy struck again. William died at just 11 years old, leaving Anne broken-hearted and without an heir. When Anne herself died in 1714, the Stuart dynasty ended. The crown passed to the Hanoverians, changing Britain's future forever. Her private grief became a national disaster, proof that dynasties could collapse not on battlefields, but in nurseries. For every royal child whose story we remember, there are countless others erased from history. Babies born with deformities were often never acknowledged. They were hidden in remote estates, sent to monasteries, or quietly buried. Admitting their existence meant admitting weakness, and monarchs couldn't risk that. So silence became the weapon of choice. Entire generations of children were lost to secrecy, their lives cut short or hidden, their stories forgotten. And yet, there were rare exceptions. Queen Victoria of Britain, for example, refused to hide her daughter, Princess Victoria, who lived with a spinal deformity. Though her life was filled with pain, she remained part of the family, present in public, a quiet act of defiance against centuries of shame.